Hi guys, so today we are going to be talking about dots. This is the second day of factoring. So remember that dot stands for a difference of two squares. So we're going to start with example 1. And when we do these, we always want to start by just kind of breaking down our first term. So our first term is x squared. And to break that down, we can just leave it as x times x, really. And 9 is also a perfect square, so that would be 3 times 3. So remember, in order for it to be dots, it kind of has to check off a checklist. It has to be a difference, which means there must be a minus sign, which this problem has. It has to be two different pieces, so a binomial, two terms. And it has to be both perfect squares, so x squared is x times x, and 9 is 3 times 3. Now when I write my answer for these, I want to keep the order the same. So because x squared came first, inside of my parentheses, the x is going to go first. And then 9 came second, so that means my 3 is going to go at the end. And then remember that the only difference between these two is that one of them gets a plus sign and the other one gets a minus sign. And that's my final answer here, x plus 3 and x minus 3. We just factored using dots. We're going to go over number 2 also. Number 2 is a little bit different because I have a 4 in front of my w squared. So I want to break this down into multiple pieces. So 4 is really just 2 times 2. And w squared is just w times w. And then 25 squared is just 5 times 5. So when I break this down into my two factors, my 2 and the w are both in the first spot, so they're kind of going to like share that spot together, 2w and 2w. And then the 5 comes last, so the 5 is going to go at the end of both of my parentheses. And then just like the first one, because the only difference here is that one of them gets a plus sign, the other one gets a minus sign. And that's my final answer. Okay, you can always go back and check these by foiling them back together, because remember, just like we did with GCF, that's undistributing, here dots is really like unfoiling. So if we foil them, we should get what we started with. Let's try number 3. So 3 starts out similar to number 2. 36 is a perfect square. 6 times 6 makes 36. And y squared is just y times y. And then 1 squared is really just 1 times 1. So my two parentheses, in my first spot of each of them is going to be a 6y. And then in the last spot of each of them is going to be the number 1. And then just my last ones, one of them gets a plus sign, the other gets a minus sign. It doesn't really matter. You could put the minus first and the plus second, but I usually like to just keep it in that order. 6y plus 1, 6y minus 1. Okay, we're going to do number 4 and number 5 together as well, just so that you guys can have some extra practice to look back at. So number 4 is just 81, 9 times 9, and x to the 6th. That one's kind of tricky, but I want to split it evenly, so I really just divide it in half, and I get x to the 3rd and x to the 3rd. And then 49 can be split into 7 and 7, and y squared is just y times y. So this one has a lot of different parts to it, so you want to make sure that you keep it really organized as you go through it. In your first spot, you're going to have a 9 and an x in both of your parentheses, and then in your last spot, you're going to have a 7 and a y, and then one of them gets a plus sign, and the other one gets a minus sign, and that's your final answer. So you really just want to make sure you're taking the perfect square of each part and then placing it in the order that it came in. Same thing with number 5, but this one, it looks kind of weird because the x squared comes second, and this is where you have to be careful, and order does matter. So 49 is just 7 and 7, and x squared is x and x, but because the 49 came first in my question, the 7 has to go first in my factoring. The x came second, so the x is going to take up the last spot in both of my factors, and then one gets a plus sign, and 1 gets a minus sign. Okay, so the order does matter here, because if you were to FOIL it back together, you wouldn't get what you started with if you switched the order. Okay? All right, again, guys, make sure that you submit your work, please, to Miss Doris the way that you have been doing, and use this to help you.